throw a pan, drop it for me. I'll rent a beach house in Miami. Wake up with no jammies. Lobster tail for dinner. Julio served that scampi. You got it if you want it. Got it if you want it.
Welcome back, everybody. We're glad to be here. I'm not going to go through the intros because you have them in your program, but we're going to launch into this. Everybody here on this panel has roots somewhere in Hollywood. Eugene, on the end, is head of video at Oculus, and he also helped launch Hulu. Jon just sold legendary films to Chinese company Wanda, and he has accumulated box office totals of $12.5 billion. That's with a B. And Peter, there isn't a computer big enough to calculate his box office gross, which is huge. But so the first question is about Hollywood. Is Hollywood an innovator, a laggard, or in step with technology? We'll start, Eugene.
Well, I would say if you look at the situation today now, I would say Hollywood probably is a slight laggard when it comes to technology. It wasn't always this case. You know, if you look at some of the innovations in Hollywood in terms of filmmaking technology, from the days of the invention of film to synchronized sound to color film, there's been a lot of innovation in Hollywood. But one of the big things that's changed over time is that Hollywood used to be completely vertically integrated. The studios employed the directors, the actors, they owned the movie theaters. And slowly that's been disintermediated to the point now where studios largely are financing vehicles for entertainment. And a lot of the innovation now in technology is actually on the distribution side. And a lot of that is being driven by technology companies. So I think that's sort of like the macro environment.
You're very kind. Jon, is Hollywood, where do we stand?
Well, I mean, to be polite, but also to be a bit indicting, I think that Hollywood is lagging in they are stuck a lot of the time. You know, Peter and Teddy spoke earlier about the music business and the lessons that could have been learned from what went on in the music business and the disruption that occurred. I think the film business was not wanting to change as much as they should have been wanting to change, and it's tough sometimes to look in the mirror and to see a few wrinkles and to go about fixing them. So I think, generally speaking, in the past, that the development of different technologies is what led to the standard windowing process that we've had to date. You know, when TV was invented, there was a TV window. When pay TV was invented, there was a window that followed that. And I think what Eugene was just referring to is the collapsing of all of that. And also you add into it the fact that we're competing not only with the best of what's out at any given time, forgetting that there are many other competitive offerings for your consumers' leisure time discretionary capital. You're also competing with the best of all time because it's all sitting there in the cloud. So I think that complete disruption and the a little bit late to wake up reality means that there's a lot more catching up to do.
Peter?
Well, I think the issue for me, having been on both sides of it, is it's not about laggard, it's about protecting their fiefdom, their space. And you'll defend their space if it gets smaller and tighter and little, try to get more out of it. And so their view is not generally a worldview. They don't have a worldview. They see everybody as challenges, and so instead of figuring out how I can incorporate, how I can utilize, how I can solve the problems that we have, they're defending their space. Now, the truth is that Hollywood is a creative factory. It has a tremendous amount of unbelievable talent, unbelievable storytellers, experts in all of the area, but institutionally has been based on being the sole provider or purveyor of content to the world. And so they're not functionally easy to change. They're not easy to embrace that kind of rapid change the technology offers and the kind of constant reinvention. So I think you'll see that in the future. But Hollywood is not a geographic place any longer, global. It's an attitude. And the attitude has to shift if they're going to still capture the audience they want, hearts, minds, and wallets.
Speaking of wallets, what role does Asia play in the future of global entertainment, especially with both of you enjoying exits from Chinese money? Peter, let's start with you.
Well, I used to say this to all my film students, cast a wide net. You might have a discrete filter, but cast a wide net. And so where are you aiming? You aiming for 300 million people in the United States or 7.5 billion people in the rest of the planet? Would you like to have 5% of 300 million people or 2% of 7 billion people? So you got to hunt where the elephants are. And you have to recognize that these elephants now want to pitch, they just don't want to catch. So they have their own repertoire they want to make. They have their own content stories they want to tell. They have their own artists they want to hear from. They have their own voices they want to do. So you have to be in a global business that's recognizing that you're not from one out, you're from in, out, and out in. It's a pitch-catch world now, both from the technology and the content and the distribution side. And so it requires a shift. It requires to surrender the belief that you own the whole food chain. You don't own the whole food chain. You're a participant in it. And it's hard to give up the incumbency of being king. King is good, and you don't give it up easily.
John, how easy was it for you to give it up?
To give what up?
The company selling.
Well, look, like Peter, I take a lot of inspiration for Peter. I, like Teddy, used to work for Peter. And Peter was an advisor, in fact, to my boss at Legendary, Thomas Tull. So there's a lot of shared DNA here and kinship. But I think that one thing I'd like to believe I share with Peter is a willingness to lean into change and try to peer around the corner and be at the vanguard, even if it means reconciling your anxiety, dealing with that unsettling nature that creeps in when you're doing something that too few are doing, and coming to see that as opportunity rather than simply having that be seen as loneliness. I felt for me that what was portable out of the job that I had done for a fraction of the time that Peter's been doing it, but the ability to speak to both sides of the aisle, to speak to artist dreamers, but also to resource holders and distribution gatekeepers, that was a portable skill set. I felt that I could take that on the road, if you will, and future-proof my career. And that the ability to speak to both constituencies, seemingly each in their native tongue, wasn't just finely applied to film and or television. That I realized that while still being humble about how I'm saying it, that I was really a purveyor of experience in my job, and that had application going forward in exponentially greater ways than had been the case in the past. Any sort of communal, urgent gathering, whether it be Coachella or an esports convention or on the floor at one of Peter's team's playoff games or a super church or a tentpole movie's release, or here, that this coming together, the shared energy and that urgency and the scarcity is where the value lied, and that could be applied across a wider array of content offerings than what Hollywood has traditionally confined itself to.
Great, thank you. Eugene, so Oculus, what's the impact of Asia and China specifically in VR for adoption?
Well, actually, the impact of the Asian market on VR is similar to what I think its impact is on entertainment in general. If you look at the audience in Asia combined, it's actually the largest audience now for entertainment product in the world. In VR specifically, too, I think Asia has a tendency to really be early adopters of technology, to really embrace that. And you're already seeing that in VR. There are startups here making their own headsets. There are people trying to finance content. At Oculus, see a lot of the VR content that's made. And recently, I've been talking to a lot of creators who've had their projects financed actually by Chinese money. It's actually probably one of the largest sources of funding for VR content in the world right now. And that's amazing to me. I think that's only going to continue. And I think it's a good sign for how VR is going to do in this market and how it's going to grow quickly here.
Well, all three of you are making huge personal, financial, career investments in VR. So is VR the next big thing, Eugene?
Well, I definitely think, and we at Oculus and Facebook also believe that virtual reality is the next computing platform. And we call it actually the platform to end all platforms because virtual reality can emulate all other screens. So when the display technology and the latency and all of the hardware and software gets to a point of sufficient quality, you'll be able to have a virtual laptop screen, infinite number of laptop screens, TVs, anything inside of virtual reality. At that point, virtual reality has sort of encompassed all the other screens in the world, and that's why the future is bright. Now, I'm not saying that's like right around the corner. It's going to take a certain amount of time to get there. But even in the name virtual reality, the term reality is there. And that's largely because virtual reality is one of those platforms that competes most directly with what we call, we jokingly refer to as RR, or real reality, which is where we are right now. So it's going to take some time to get there, but I think the reason Facebook bought Oculus, the reason all the big tech companies are investing so much in VR is because they see that this, after the smartphone, is that next big computing shift.
So John, you're spending a lot of time in VR as advisor and investor in Jaunt. What's your take? Is it going to be the next big thing?
Well, I hope this isn't seen as heretical, given that this is tech-focused gathering, but I'm a slightly skeptical person when it comes to what I call the headset derby. I think that I'm driven, again, as I said earlier, about the communality of the experience, and just as I'm working on a television series with Netflix that is the first of they're trying to bring together family audiences because you can throw it up on your 40-inch or greater screen in your house. So they're trying to address those that indict them for leading to the fragmentation of audience and the isolation that comes from single user experience. So I figure that there's a way to hedge the VR approach a bit. When you see how tiny LEDs have gotten and how closely packed they can become and how they can be swapped out in modular panels and you can extend them beyond the peripheral rim or have them completely envelop you, I'm not talking about just creating another version of a theater, but I also think that Jaunt started as a camera company, and we've just recruited a great CEO in George Kliavkov. We're in the middle of pivoting into being a content company, a platform, as Eugene says. So I'm touching it in slightly different ways than most people assume when you hear the word VR.
Peter.
Well, I look at all of my businesses I'm in. I'm sports, music, film, television, live content business. I'm in the live business. I make movies still, but in the live business. And I look at VR as an absolute value-added proposition for my audiences globally. It allows somebody to be there in the best seat in the house. I think that's an incredible addition, whether they watch it for 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And all the issues around technology, as I said this morning, about the size of the headset. You remember that big phone? It could hardly move, and all those things, and the wires. I mean, you talk about HD. I remember just at the venue, you used to have a camera. It was so long, HD, just as 7, 8 years ago, this long, and the cable they ran for it was this wide, and it went to a Peterbilt truck, a double Peterbilt truck, in order to digest the content and transmit it. Now, your mobile phone is an HD camera, and you can send it around the world in 8 years. So when you talk about the headsets being too heavy, that's just a dalliance. That's just a now. Is the benefit to the audience going to be interesting? For me, I can then have my concerts. I can have you in the red carpet. I can have you at the Golden Globes sitting next to Jack Nicholson and Angelina Jolie, and you're in charge of it. I can reach a global audience with an experience. Because what I look at myself in, even though I'm in the technology side, I look at myself in the artistic business, I'm in the audience business. And so what I say to me is, I'm in the emotional transportation business. I've got to emotionally transmit my audience to the place and the event in every way I can, as if they were there, if they're there. And this brings me one step closer, and I think it's going to evolve. I have confidence in it. I've bet my time and my energy and reputation on believing in it, but I'm not in a foot race because I have the business now anyways. It's just that I'm looking to cannibalize my own business because I believe that's a good attitude to have, and that is to take chances and risks that you may upset some of the apple cart, but you may develop a whole new culture because maybe somebody in far-off countries or far-off states can't get to these sites. There's only 18,000 people in the arena, only 50,000 people at Coachella, and maybe there's only 1,500 here. But suddenly you're here, you're in that seat, and you're looking around and you're seeing everybody else, you're participating. And the cost structure of that, just remember this, the cost structure of that is a very added value. You could have all these things going on. The camera there is an unsupported camera. You don't need a camera operator. You don't need transmission wires. You don't need a set-top box. It comes to you that way. So the friction between the two, the artist and the audience, is shortened and removed or diminished. I think that's going to be proved to be a valuable tool. How it'll all shake out, how it'll all work out, I couldn't tell you. But the person that looked out the window of his house in 1906, and he was in the business of having carts carry goods from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara, and it took a day and a half, and he saw this thing go by. He said, "What's that?" He said, "That's this thing called an automobile." And he said, "I don't want that smelly, smoky, don't want that." Well, if he saw himself in the transportation business rather than in the horse and buggy business, he might have taken advantage of that and owned space forever or a long, long period of time. I think we all think that there's something special in this space worth pursuing. I think that's what's engaged our interest.
Jon, we know that you think that there is something special going on, but how would you respond to Peter in terms of some of your more cautious approach to it all?
Well, I think there's more alignment actually in what we're both saying than might otherwise appear at first blush. I have long said that I was in the business of transportation, and I had forgotten. I probably learned so much of this from Peter because I was one of his students and I was one of his employees. But I was in the business of identifying enlightened tour guides to take us to worlds that weren't easily accessed, right, and to allow for artisanal exploration of those worlds. So it became about who you picked to be the tour guide and who could get you past the secret door with the secret handshake. Mm-hmm. So my point about the headset derby was I care less about betting on a specific horse, and I do absolutely agree that reducing that friction and completely making so easily accessed the experience. As I said earlier, I want to be seen as a purveyor of experience. That there is showmanship inherent in it, but there's also a humanistic sharing that goes back to the cavemen about wanting to tell stories, whether it was grunting or drawing pictures on cave walls. So that's a long-winded way of saying it's going to be something. It's not yet defensively monetizable, but you can't keep the audience down. If you are offering transport to a place they can't go, or even worse, if you're pretending or seeming to pretend that they aren't allowed to go there, watch how quickly they get there.
Right.
Eugene, these guys come from it from a content standpoint, but when we're talking about Facebook buying Oculus, it completely opened up a different door, perhaps. Can you talk about the social aspects of VR?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you that VR today can be a very lonely experience. When you put on the headset, you're making a choice to leave the real world and leave everything behind. VR today is still very single-threaded. When you're in VR, there's only enough compute power to do one thing at a time. Watch a video, play a game. Asking someone to devote their full attention to a single thing in today's world is actually one of the highest burdens you can put on any experience. We've gotten so used to watching TV or watching a sporting event with the phone on our side and switching back and forth. And so that's something that VR has to solve. The other thing it has to solve is bringing other people into VR. making it like a truly social environment, just like the real world is. Clearly, Facebook's whole business is predicated on connecting people, so this is one of the chief problems that we have to solve in VR, is how to simultaneously get many people into VR together. The good thing is that the bar for feeling like someone is in virtual reality with you is much lower than you would think.
Right.
We have a demo called Toy Box, in which all you see of the other person is sort of a wireframe generic face and their two hands floating in space. But you can hear their voice, you can see their head movement, you can see their hand movement, and when you're in there, you feel like that person is in the room with you, standing across from you. Now imagine that taken to an umpteenth degree with more realistic avatars, more realistic eye tracking, facial expressions, body tracking. Once that's there, you know, we're really close to creating a virtual environment that's like any space in the real world.
So you're looking at the social aspects. Peter, where would you bet? At lunch today, you talked about medical uses, VR, you know, you could virtually do an operation or watch it, or shopping, or sports, or live events. Where do you think the real monetizable opportunity in the near future is for VR?
You have to describe near future. Next week, not much more than what it is right now. A couple of years, that's not a long time, but that's a long time in our experience. And I posit to you, and I was asked about this, as I mentioned earlier today, that wherever you have a social experience and wherever you have a live experience, live and social, it works really quite well, wonderful. And so I was sharing this with some big real estate people. I really believe that the secret sauce is shopping, because it's transactional. You know, you can actually monetize it immediately. And shopping is an emotional sport. I ask all my daughters and my wife, and they'd rather go to the Warrior game or go shopping at Barney's or Gucci, and they choose Barney's or Gucci. So that it's a sport, and they share it. So when you think of sharing and a sport, and I don't know that they have to visually be seen in the space, but you can imagine with the computational power of the smartphones improving, you could actually have a voice communication with somebody, and you could share the space and communicate with them. So that shopping is going to be a major element in it. And to just take a moment and think about it, look how the internet has changed shopping. Just go to the malls and see what's happened. People go to the malls, look around what they want to buy and go home, and then order it online. Look at the pictures and order it online. And so when you extrapolate that, what if they could go to the mall without being at the mall, order it, and have the delivery, you know, as quickly as they can now, and have a social experience doing it? That could be a big game changer. So, I mean, I think, you know, it's hard to envision a future that doesn't include VR in so many areas like that, and teaching and training. Our sports teams, we're all using VR now to teach our players, our basketball players, how to come down the court, how to see visually where the spatial relationships are. These are billion-dollar businesses, just trying to figure out how we can coach these people differently. Almost everywhere that human beings act and be, VR has a potential to interface.
John, where's your bet? Where do you think it's going to happen?
Well, I think it is too limiting to assume that VR is only another content offering or a way of accessing content, because you then get very quickly into the debate of, do you want to be led by Tiffany storytellers and have catharsis and epiphany occur, and awe and surprise, when you are able to direct your attention perhaps right where the storyteller would not want you to have it directed at the key moment in the drama. So I think that the killer apps may also lie, extending a bit from what Peter just said. I'm very impressed by what Jeremy Bailenson is doing at the Stanford Behavioral Research Lab in terms of empathy training.
Right.
I think racial sensitivity training, the ability to pull our world even more quickly together than pop culture has allowed for, is potentially an underestimated application.
Yes.
I also think that, extending again from training sports players, if you could train people to do things that were so dangerous that you couldn't really replicate them in the real world, it's one thing to build a fake building and train firemen how to fight fires in it. You can approximate reality, but there are certain realities that cannot be approximated except at our peril. And if you can do that in the VR space, think how much more effective you can be if that cataclysm occurs.
That's a great point.
Eugene, so as media and technology converge, okay, what factors do you think will drive the biggest adoption? Is it social? Is it characters? Is it story? Is it experience? Is it competition? Can you isolate one factor that you think will be the difference maker?
Well, broadly in VR, I think you'll see sort of passive media tend to be an early leader in driving adoption. So consumption of video and photos. It's done that in every other computing platform. It's led the way, so I don't think virtual reality is any different. When you talk about character, story, experience, I still believe fundamentally that humans crave stories. You know, to your point about sitting around campfires and telling stories, the way our brains as humans make sense of things is to tell stories. We see A happen and then B happen, and then we tell a story about how A caused B. We process information very well when it's put in a narrative form. And so that's one thing that, you know, Hollywood still has going for it. They're the best storytellers in the world. That skill is timeless. It doesn't matter if you're in virtual reality or doing a Hollywood blockbuster or anything like that. You still need that ability to tell a story. I mean, all the demos that were given today, right? Every presenter was telling a story about their startup and trying to tell it in a compelling way. So I will always bet on story. That skill will never go out of vogue. Whether a TV showrunner is being employed by, you know, a TV network or Netflix or Hulu or Amazon, they're all buying the same thing, and that's not going to change.
John, what do you think? Story, character, social, experience, what will be the biggest driver of adoption?
Emotion. Emotion, full stop. If you can find some way to move somebody from A to B, and even better, have it be an unexpected result on their part, they will give you far more than you could ever try to extract.
So Peter, we have a new medium in VR. So all the people in Hollywood who are used to telling stories, their skills, are they still applicable? Is there, what are the challenges in storytelling? And I open it up all to you. If story is king and the delivery system becomes less important, how much is there to learn in terms of storytelling in VR?
Well, narrative, I call it that. Narrative is always the way we make sense of things, in every way. We are all storytellers. You tell everything you do is you tell a story to somebody. You don't say, oh my God, you tell them emotionally because you want to connect with them, not just contact them. And I would posit to you that if Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo were here or Picasso was here, they'd be interested in VR. They'd be interested in this type of narrative. They'd be interested in painting their stories and pictures with these tools and resources. So we're going to have a whole new set of storytellers driven by the same thing, emotional transportation, driven by the imperative to tell their stories and their narratives to all kinds of people, for each other people to tell their stories in it. But they will require new storytelling skills. You know, John just said, you know, it's hard to imagine a framework where you don't use the best storytellers. We know where to look and how to look. That's true in certain types of linear narrative storytelling. But you go to an event, you're in charge. You're in charge of what you look at. There's no curation. There's no curation of anything. And you have a wonderful time because you are a participant in it. You're energizing yourself to self-narrate that story. And there are tools that are coming to you, music and interactions, and you're putting it together. So there are different ways that emotional transportation happens. When you go to a play, if you put, for example, you just took a Broadway play or a play here, a big play, powerful play here. You put the camera in the front third row or the fourth row. You're in the third row and the fourth row. No one's telling you what to look at. The director's framing the scene and the lighting, and you're deciding what you look at listening to the director. Well, you could have a great play that's going on in London. You could have Hamilton going on in London and have a camera in the fourth row and sit there just like any other participant and look at the audience in live real time, look at them responding and feel like you're there, and you're looking at it just like they look at it. So it's a long way of saying there are different ways to tell stories, and meshing and merging the technologies in that different storytelling techniques is what it will be about. You have to be ambidextrous, you have to remain curious, and you have to explore these tools. But I think that's what this new ecology, this new technology will be about. And if you stay being curious as opposed to, critical, nothing there for me, forget it, it won't work, you're making a mistake.
I do make the distinction, though, between experience, where self-directed exploration, I regard that as experience as differentiated from storytelling where you are signing up to be transported and someone else is driving. So with live, putting people at the events that you are a purveyor of, I have no doubt that has easy value. That's already taking place. Where it goes in the future is where I start to want to build in some adjacent possibilities.
Yeah, I was just going to add that in our lifetimes, probably, given the age of everybody here in the room, VR is probably the biggest shift in storytelling visually that will occur. You know, I wasn't alive for the invention of film, for the invention of sync sound, for color. We haven't had any major change of that magnitude in quite some time. But VR certainly is going to take some time to learn the visual grammar and how to actually tell linear narrative in that format. But as with the theme of this demo day that was reinforced by Peter in his talk, you know, you can't be afraid of failure. The moment you think about what you have to lose, that's the moment you've already lost, right? It's all about actually seeing VR for what it can do and not for what it can't do relative to other mediums.
Well said.
We're running out of time. Let's just end with each of you addressing this audience. They're investors, they're entrepreneurs, they're people with a lot of hope who want to tell their story. Given your careers, what advice would you be giving them? What are important things they could think about? And let's try to keep it to under a minute. Thanks.
Starting with me. Gosh, I'm trying to think of something that Peter hasn't already covered that would be good advice on this front. But, you know, I'm so impressed with just like the energy of everybody in this room, the demos we've seen already. And, you know, if there's one thing that I've taken as my mantra for my career, it's to not be afraid of starting over, you know, and making yourself the student again, which gets to what Peter talks about being curious. I started my career at Amazon. I left that to try to go into filmmaking. I'd start from the, you know, 1 minute I'm managing a big team at a company, the next minute I'm making coffee on a set and trying to learn from the ground up. And I've done that a couple times in my life. It's not always easy to start over, but you know, when you start a company, when you try to reinvent yourself, when you try to disrupt an industry, it all comes from that same impulse of not being afraid to get in on the ground floor again and be the student again. And so that's the thing, I think. What's the saying about, you know, when the student is ready, the teacher appears or the master appears. It's about that. John?
I would say two things. One related to vision. I mean, you would not be here if you weren't possessed of vision. But you could have two people looking at the very same thing or the very same set of facts, and the person with vision is going to see the potential and is going to not feel afraid to lean in and be the one that is perhaps accused of being naive or wrong-minded because they're leaning into the unknown. So turning that vision into a superpower for yourself, I think, is one thing I would reinforce. You wouldn't be here if you don't already possess it. And then the second thing is, for me, not to presume that my experience should be applied to your lives, but for me, I had to find a way to balance my default personality, my lower key, more mellow affect, in an industry that can eat you up, you know? And I had to, for a long time, figure out how to turn underestimation at moments and my overperformance as a result of that underestimation being a catalyst for me into a superpower for myself. So I would suggest to you that for all the skeptics who don't understand why your vision has brought you here, and why you've invested your time and energy and capital in certain unproven, non-terraformed real estate, you're ahead of the curve, and turn that into a catalyst for overperformance.
Peter, you want to bring us home?
I agree really with both of my colleagues in their perspective. You know, there's an American English expression, you know, curiosity can kill the cat. Have you ever heard that expression? Well, I'll tell you this, lack of curiosity, the cat's dead. You have to be constantly curious. You have to be open to change. You have to be an agent for change. If you remain in that space, opportunities, you will see them. You will be able to seize them. And I think the real energy that one has to be in the world we live in and on today is recognize you are responsible for you. You must be active in your own rescue. When you rescue, meaning to what you want to do, in your own benefit, and your vision you want to have. Don't wait for somebody to come along. Really engage in your life in a way that says, this is not an experiment, this is your life. You may be experimenting, but your attitude will shape your aptitude. And if your attitude is one of, I'm curious, what does it mean? How can I employ it? How can I engage it? If you bring that attitude to you and you ask that high quality question, you will find your high quality answer.
That's all the time we have. Please give our guests a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here and sharing.
Thank you.